Hello, good evening, and welcome to this new session on Kingdom Leadership. Um, in this series, we're hoping to go on a journey together to continue in our process of developing the leader that is inside us. Um, well, in this particular series, we want to consider a few thoughts, and I would like to start by asking a few questions. One of those questions is this: who is a leader? That word is perhaps one of the very popular words that we find around. Leader this, leader that. So who is a leader? Now, I'm not going to attempt to answer all these questions right now, but most of this will be touched upon as we progress. What is your own perception about leadership? For example, when you hear the word leader or leadership, do you think, no, this is not for me, this is for some other people? This is for somebody who has a position in government or a position in an organization, or is for some other people except me. So anyone but me. Another question is, can I actually become a leader? These are some questions that might be going on in our minds. And do I have what it takes to be a leader? So what does it really take? What is the capacity of a leader? Another thought to ponder on is leadership about people and positions? Because that's a common notion that if somebody has a position perhaps in government or in a company, maybe the CEO or the managing director or maybe the prime minister or some other title, we think automatically this person must be a leader. So is it about people or is it about positions? In fact, the Chinese will say that he who thinks he leads or is leading without anyone following is merely taking a walk. Are the Chinese correct? We'll be looking at this. Who exactly am I leading? So if I'm leading, um, if it's not about people, or if it's about people, what exactly am I leading? Or who am I leading? Another thought to ponder on is, right, now this old leadership thing is beginning to get into me. So how do I become a leader? And of course, we want to also consider whether there is a price for leadership. So these are thoughts that we're going to be considering as we progress. As a matter of fact, there are a few other thoughts that we might be touching upon as we go on this journey. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is a concept I call mental transformation. And I like to put it to you first and foremost that most people suffer from wrong education. When I say wrong education, I mean primarily the culture that we live in educates us. Everyone comes from one family or the other. Everyone has gone to one school or the other. Everyone works in some place or some organization or the other. Everyone attends one social gathering or the other. And whether we like it or not, we are being educated progressively by all these many influences. And most often, our culture, our society, even the family and the systems around the world educate us in some way. One of such is to think that only certain people can become leaders. In some cultures, there's a notion that you ought to be seen but not heard. And these influences shape our minds or our mentality. And consequently, um, our outcomes, our final outcomes, or our progressive outcomes are being controlled by the way we think, the way we view things. You probably have heard some people use this word, I'm shy, as if it were to be a virtue. But that statement comes from a particular way of thinking, a particular culture, a particular cultural influence. And I want to put it to us that the greatest threat to fulfillment of purpose is a wrong way of viewing the world, a wrong, a subdued outlook to life is one of the greatest threats to the fulfillment of purpose. Now, the outcome of this is very clear. You create around you exactly what you are. People who read the scriptures will probably be aware of this verse that says that as a man thinks in his heart, so is the man. So we pretty much create the environment that we have by the way we think. Now, if we don't like the environment that we have, then one thing is paramount. We must challenge not the environment, but the mental system. And how does that happen? We have to look at what we have learned and check whether they are the right thing to be held in our minds, and possibly unlearn them, which is a very difficult process, I must say. And then to relearn what we ought to have in our minds to shape our environment. Now, the thing is the average man does not perceive himself or herself as a leader because of the reasons I've mentioned aforetime. Now, you cannot lead people any further than you have gone yourself, which means that the way you see the world is, one, how you create your environment, and you cannot take people to a destination that you yourself have not been to. Now, I felt like I should touch on this point before as we progress. I think about an hour ago, or just about an hour and a half ago, myself and my family went to the polling booth to vote for the next government. Obviously, in the UK, elections are ongoing, and it's been, I mean, a showpiece over the last few weeks and months, and you could see the amount of emphasis that we place on government, and that is exactly right, because government is a system of control that exerts its influence over a territory. Now, if you are somewhere, maybe in Antarctica, where no one lives, there are no shrubs, no trees, nothing, you could just say that that's just an ungoverned ground, pretty much. But when the land begins to get governed, or when a piece of the earth or ground begins to get governed, you call that a land. So alias England, alias the land of the living, alias the land of this or that. So a land is simply an area where you have one form of government or the other. So now the government over the land is called the state. I'm trying to throw this in because these are fundamental concepts that will shape our discussion as we progress. Now, every nation, especially in the UK where I'm at now, places priority on government. And wherever you join us from, you can tell as well that your nation places so much emphasis on government. In the last few months, we've seen a few electoral processes going on in places like Nigeria and other parts of the world. In fact, maybe in some other countries in Europe, elections are ongoing, or the process is ongoing, and we can see the amount of emphasis, the priority that we place on government. People fight government, they contest government. So if you're in government and you didn't perform right over the last, say, 4 years or 5 years, you're probably quaking your boots because you know that the electorate are going to take that on you at the ballot, at the polling booths. That's for places where votes actually do count. People look up to government, they castigate government, they pursue government, they set government up, they change it. In fact, there have been some unconventional ways of influencing government. We've seen a few things that's happened around the world. The Arab Spring, what's happened around the north of Africa, and some other parts of the world. Ukraine is an example where people change government, whether by conventional or unconventional means. So these things are ongoing about government, and it does show how how people feel about government, how people are so engrossed in the whole process of either electing or choosing government or changing government. So now nations vote for and against government, depending on how they feel or what their experience have been by the government that's ruled their land over a number of years. So somehow, all of this point to something, which is that there is a deep-seated idea about government in all of us. And most of us really are looking for something that's, I can call an utopia, some kind of ideal government, a kind of governance that that meet our aspirations, that resonate with our real desires. For some people, they think, no, the amount of funding in government is too small, so they want more. Some people think immigration is an issue, so they want that control. Some people that focus on other things like the use of resources, renewable energies and so on. So all of these feature and they reflect our priorities as far as governance is concerned. Now, my question is this some kind of inordinate affection? Is it why are we so engrossed in governance? Now, let's see. I like to also put to us that the same way we feel about government is exactly the same way God feels about government. And God actually prioritizes government just like we do. As a matter of fact, God initiated government. God established government. And when governments that he established don't perform well, I've read in scriptures, I think in the book of Job, says that God sets up government and he also displaces government. And if you look through scriptures, you will see a number of accounts where there have been direct influence of the divine on governance. I recount the case of the king of Babylon at the time, or the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh, where there was a direct influence of God on the affairs of government. Now, God expects and he also demands government on the earth. Why? Well, each time we talk about the earth is nothing but a piece of real estate. Of course, that real estate is quite rich because it's got a lot of things in it: diamond, coal, oil, gas, and so on and so forth. So it's a very rich real estate by all accounts. But the thing is that the real estate does not have government in itself. There must be a government that exacts influence over that real estate to shape its affair and control it the way that it should be. Now, God himself created and established the first government on earth. And that's the thought I want us to really hold on to very dearly. The first government on earth was established by God. And God, like we know, it does not change his mind every 4 years or every 5 years like most governments do. He still wants the government that he initiated ab initio on his earth. Now, we will see how this really plays into this concept of kingdom leadership. Obviously, when I use the construct kingdom leadership, you could see two words coming out straight away: kingdom and leadership. Now, what do you mean by kingdom? Obviously, I live in the United Kingdom, and that's a kingdom. Now, the question I want to put to us is, the United Kingdom or any other kingdom that you know around the world, first, you first know that you call a place a kingdom if there is a monarch in government. Where you don't have a monarch, that is a royal family, you can't say you have a kingdom. So kingdoms are characterized by a royal authority, a monarchy that sits in a state of affairs on the government of that land. That's a very strong thought I want us to keep to pay attention to. And of course, put that construct together, kingdom and leadership, then you begin to think about, right, so this is a leadership where there is the influence of a kingdom, a monarchy, or a king over that territory. Now, I want to submit to us that most of the time when we read the scriptures, I'm obviously paying very strong attention to scriptures here, because this concept, um, from my observation, is a very strong concept that runs through the scriptures from Genesis right through Revelation. And you will see that God did not introduce himself as a president. There's a word that he uses about himself. He calls himself a king, which means he's a monarch. It also means that he has a royal family as a consequence. Just about, if I look at the UK, I can see the Queen. She is a royal authority, and she has a family. And everyone in that family have certain birth privileges that other people outside of that family don't have or can't exercise. Not only that, people in that country where a king lives have certain citizenship rights. In fact, I can back up to say that individuals in a royal family, apart from having birth privileges, they also have citizenship rights. So you're both a member of a family and a citizen of that territory. And as a consequence, they have and do exercise royal authority. Now, there's a concept that you find in kingdoms, which is what they call a royal household. By royal household, you don't mean just the house. You're actually talking about the affairs of the entire real estate of the monarch. Now that includes businesses, includes governance of the private family, includes various other interests that, as it were, represent the state in that monarch. Now you also have royal etiquette, you have the order of succession, you have a culture in that territory, you have the influence of that kingdom in territories. Now, you probably be aware of what's happened in history, how that when a kingdom chooses to exercise influence over another territory, there's a term that we use for that, call it colonization. Now, that happens, and hopefully in the future we'll have time to really talk about that and address that in full context. But let's just suffice that we mentioned this briefly because I want us to be able to put this term kingdom leadership in proper context. Now, the word context really is very significant, because when you take a word or a thought or an idea out of its context, it loses the intended meaning. So I want us to be able to keep this thought in our minds, kingdom leadership. Now, I want us to sort of wrap up this part with the scripture that you'll probably see on screen. It says, "And have made us kings and priests to our God, and we shall reign on the earth." Now, I was saying previously that when God created the earth, there was a government that he intended on the earth. And you could see it being reinforced again in that verse of scripture. The intent of God is that mankind reign not in heaven, but on earth. Now, there's a reason for that, and we won't have time to go into it in full details in this session. But let's hold that thought. And if you like, you can connect that back to the first statement in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, 27, 28, where God did say that he expresses intent that man should have dominion. Now, my question to you is this: if someone has dominion, if someone is a king, if someone is reigning over the earth, now, would you say that person is a leader or not? That's a question I want us to answer. And in my view, I would probably say that person is a leader, which is what brings me to this thought that man's purpose for creation is and was leadership. It was leadership and it still is leadership. I mentioned a thought the other time that God does not change his mind every 4 years or every other moment. In fact, the scripture says that it does not have a shadow of turning, which means it's not a variable, it's constant. Its intent are perpetual. So if God in created man to be a leader, I'll probably still say that his intent is still that man should be a leader. Now, every human being was created for leadership. Why? Because in that script, in that Genesis chapter 1 and 2, we see that he spoke to a being called Adam. The word Adam does not mean one man, it means all of human. So the entire human race, 7.2 billion people on the earth, were created for leadership. Now, when you hear this statement, I probably predict or guess that something is moving in your mind, which is that if 7.2 billion people, in fact, the first thing is, can 7.2 billion people rule on the earth? Your mind may wander to some parts of the world where people are in obvious deprivation or certain people are fighting and all of that. And you think, no, surely those people are not leaders. Well, that's a thought. But another question might be that if everyone is a leader, then who follows? Well, that question probably reveals your idea about leadership. Because if we've been educated by culture that leadership means that someone is leading other people, then it shapes exactly how we view this. And because we have that thought, is one of the reasons why we seem to have been experts at self-degradation and self-cancellation, which is to rule ourselves out of leadership, to think, no, I just can't be a leader, or I'm not a leader yet, or I can't just be leader. But I want to say that nothing could be further from the truth, because the original assignment of God for mankind was rulership over earth. Think about that. The original assignment of God for mankind was rulership over earth. Now, let me define leadership just very briefly before we have a chance to talk about it more comprehensively. And leadership here is defined as the capacity to influence the conditions and the environment that determine the destiny of life in that environment. What does that mean? It means that leaders have the capacity to shape conditions, to act in certain ways that have effect on both physical and non-physical environment, so that everything that is in that environment feels the effect, the influence of the action. As a matter of fact, it does mean that leaders have the capacity to determine the destiny of people. They have the capacity to take people where they want you to go, where they want to go. So which means, look at what you're doing today. We're casting a ballot for the government in the UK. So it means that whoever ends up to be in government can take the people exactly where it wants them to go. Some people are agitating about, oh, we don't want to be in the UK, we want to be in UK. I mean, sorry, we don't want to be in Europe, or we want to be in Europe. Now, depending on the kind of government we have, a government can say, no, okay, I'm actually taking the people out of Europe. So which means, whether the other people like it or not, that leader, through his influence, through his alliances and all that, can take people in a particular direction. Obviously, we're not talking politics today, but you probably guess that when you're talking about leadership, ruling over a territory, that's some kind of politics. It does mean, therefore, that everyone is political, as it were. In fact, there's nothing further that addresses that than the fact that every one of us, or at least some people today, have exercised their power at the ballot. And whatever country that you live in, at some point, you also exercise your right to choose a leader to govern the affairs of the country. That is your political exercise. So which means you are a political individual. But that's a different debate entirely. Now, Jesus mentioned a particular statement, which I want us to pay attention to. He said, leave them alone. They are blind leaders. And if the blind lead the blind, they both fall into the ditch. Now, the previous statement that I made was that leaders determine your destiny, taking you where they want you to go. And that scripture that I just quoted reflects that perfectly. Now, first, it's apparent from what Jesus said that someone can be blind and be leading people. Now, think about that. If someone is blind and is leading people, obviously that's not talking about physical blindness, because that would be apparent to see. And if somebody is blind physically and is leading someone, I mean, that's quite, you can say, no, you can't do this because that's obvious. But it's not talking about physical blindness. So it says that a leader can be blind and lead other people. But there's another thing to consider there, that if a blind leader is leading people, those people have to also be blind. They have to be blind to the fact that the leader leading them does not see. So that's why it says, and if the blind lead the blind, and there's a common destination for them, which is the ditch. By blind there, Jesus is talking about lack of vision. He's talking about lack of understanding, lack of perception. Now, this concept is so strong that you can then infer that the quality of leadership that you have is a direct function of the quality of sight. Look at that scripture. It says, your eye is the lamp of your body. When your eyes are healthy, your whole body is full of light. But when they are unhealthy, your body also is full of darkness. So see to it then that the light within you is not darkness. Therefore, if your whole body is full of light and no part of it is dark, it will be just as full of light as when a lamp shines its light on you. So, which means from this scripture that the quality of leadership that you have is a quality of what they see. So when somebody is leading you, the first question you have to ask is, what do you see? Where are we going? Show me where you are taking me, because I may not want to go with you on that journey. Otherwise, that scripture will come true. If the blind lead the blind, they both fall into the ditch. Now, I made a statement the other time that everybody is a leader. And we're obviously talking about kingdom leadership. And all of this is taken right out of scriptures. What God and Jesus did teach or taught us. Now, we have a leadership, I call it co-mission. Co-mission means that the mission is for everyone. That's where we find the word commission. Now, it says leadership is about destination. It's about movement and a place. Now, if you look at that word, if the blind lead the blind, lead is a verb, not a noun. If a blind lead means that there is some kind of movement, they fall into the ditch. So that means they have a destination. So leadership, therefore, is about destination. It's about an alternative place from the present. It's about movement from the way things are to what the leader, through its quality of sight, see them to be. So I said leading is a verb because you cannot lead without movement. You cannot be static in a place and be leading. So leadership is about, I use that word guardedly, occupation of territory with something. It's being in charge of state of affairs in a place. I lifted that word from scriptures when Jesus said it was given a proverb about a leadership proverb that sort of relates to the context we are treating today on kingdom leadership. The summary is occupy till I come. And I was looking up the word occupy. It says to do business, to trade, to keep busy. So let's look at that scripture. It says, it said, therefore, a certain nobleman went into a far country to receive for himself a kingdom and to return. And he called his 10 servants and delivered them 10 pounds and said to them, occupy till I come. Another translation says, do business with this till I come, which means the occupation that we're talking about, it's not really just, it's not in the military sense that we probably are familiar with. It's talking about occupying a territory with something. Obviously, from that scripture, with the pounds, with the gift that is given to them. Now, that line of thought is very strong, as we'll see as we go. Another leadership mandate that we see in scripture is one that I saw in Mark 16:15. Now, I'm using scriptures today a lot because we're talking about leadership concept from the mind of God. So, obviously, my core reference has to be from scriptures. Now, he said unto them, go ye into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. I want us to analyze these words. Now, the word go means movement. And I did say the other time that leadership is about movement. So the word go is about movement, which means there is something that the leader is about. There is a destination. There is a displacement from a particular position, a particular state of affairs to another. Now, the word into talks about integration, engagement. Why? You cannot influence a territory or a place from the outside. It's impossible. Okay, let's proceed. Now, we're also talking about the word all. The all simply implies that nothing is off limits. Nothing is exempt from this going into that we just talked about. Now, you see the other word says the world. I think this probably should be Matthew 28. Now, the world in this instance is talking about systems of influence and control. Now, you notice that it did not say go into all the earth, because the earth is different from the world. The earth, like I said the other time, is the real estate, the physical earth. But the world is the system of influence over the earth. And that's different. So which means that you do not need to leave the city where you are in to go into a world. I can suggest to you that wherever you are, right where you are, there is a world that influences that territory. And it says, go into all the world. Every system of influence. Now, that is what to do. It says, make disciple. The word disciple is the word student. As a matter of fact, if you go back in history, a lot of people did have disciples. The philosophers of the day, Aristotle, Plato, they had disciples. In fact, the Herodians, every major area, every major world power or personality had students. And these students are people who perpetuate themselves with the teacher. They constantly go with the teacher to constantly hear their thoughts, their ideas. So it means that the teacher is constantly transferring his ideas into the mind of the students. So in time, you find the students talking exactly as their teacher. You know, back in the old times, you call that teacher, let's see, what do you use for it? Master teacher, or in the Hebrew context, you call it rabbi or rabboni, which means a teacher who has who is endowed or who is well educated or vast in a particular knowledge area. So that's why I call them master teacher. They have mastery in an area of learning, and so they teach that to their students from time to time. Now, he also said, into every nation. The word nation there is the word ethnos, which means every grouping of people. Now, this is very interesting. You see, in worlds, what you find there are not gold and not diamonds and all that. You find people. There are peoples in worlds. So if you go to the system, say the system of the media, who do you find there? People. If you go to the world of finance, what do you find there? People. So it's and you find that every grouping of people in the world have some kind of financial systems. So when it says going to every nation, it's talking about groupings of people, which means that you cannot leave those worlds and still influence them. To influence those worlds, you must have a means of getting into those worlds. And this is the concept that I'm trying to reinforce in all of these sessions. Obviously, we've had a few sessions in the past, especially a fortnight ago, where I spoke extensively about gifting, the power of your gift. And I would very much encourage us to, if you have the time, go over those sessions again, because it's so powerful, so simple, but so powerful. Now, talking about that, I want to suggest to us that, when you're teaching fundamental ideas, things that have long-lasting, eternal consequences, always try to use simple examples that people can easily relate to. For example, the master teacher himself, Jesus, he was talk about the fish, he would talk about yeast. I'm sure Jesus never had a bakery, but of course, people did bake in wherever he lived. But he would talk about these things because he used them to reinforce eternal ideas. And that's how you know an effective teacher, someone who can simplify concepts, anybody can make anything complex, but it takes somebody who is smart enough to keep them simple. Now, he gave an assignment, he said, teaching them, which means we have a mandate of education. We have the mandate to become the example, the mandate to become the transformer, the agent of change in this world. Now, I'm sure to some of us, this scripture might be taking a totally different meaning, or maybe an expanded meaning. It's not a religious statement. As a matter of fact, as far as I'm concerned, there's nothing in scripture that is religious. Everything there is a king talking to his nation. It's a king talking to his family. And if we believe what he said in scriptures, when he said you are to reign on the earth, then we should see the Bible as our king speaking to us in easy to understand language. Okay. Now let's talk about purposeful engagement, because we said we're going into these systems. And I want to reinforce these ideas again, that you cannot transform what you cannot influence. And you cannot influence what you don't engage with. So change, therefore, is nearly impossible from outside the environment. So if you're to transform an environment, you have to be the influence in that environment. Now, you may not have a title, you may not have the position, as it were, but you must have the capacity to influence that environment. That's why I mean by that next statement, that you have to be in a position of influence to effect change. Think about Joseph. Joseph was not Pharaoh. He never became Pharaoh. But right from where he was in the prison, he was able to influence the whole of Egypt. And that power of influence brought him out of the prison. And the title was just a consequence of his influence. The position, being a prime minister, did not make him a leader. He was already a leader, and is the exertion of his influence opened up that title, that space. That's why you will probably hear this word that says that a man's gift makes room for him. So the gift must have been present before the room is made. The room does not create the gift. The gift creates the room. That's the concept I want us to consider strongly. So you must have the capacity to influence, to be a transformer of environments. These are thoughts I want us to consider very well. You can write them down, but no plagiarism is allowed. Right. I want to also crave indulgence. I was thinking that we may have to sort of extend some of these sessions because the ideas that we're trying to discuss are so vast that sometimes it's a bit hard to contain that within an hour. And in addition, we also want to have question and answer time where we answer questions live on this platform. So if you have a question, therefore, please use the chat button right on the top right hand corner of your screen. Please go in there, can introduce yourself and write the question, or if there's any contribution, if anything resonates with you and saying, well, that's correct, let us know. If you're saying, I don't agree with that, also let us know and we can have a session to discuss that. Now, the key to influence, the power of influence, and I mentioned this very, very strongly in the last session, is your leadership gift. Now, this is the context where 7.2 billion people can lead at the same time, because every one individual that is on the earth has gifting in one area or the other. So I can say this over and over again. And sometimes when I mention some of these things and they sound like repetition, it is just not repetition for the sake of it. It is repetition for the sake of reinforcement of the idea. Because until an idea is fully reinforced in the mind, it still doesn't have any effect. So the leadership capacity in you, or in most people, is smothered under the belief that you are a follower. There's nothing wrong about being a follower. It's just that when that leadership must lead to something other than followership, than being a follower. Because the destiny of everyone is to be a leader. The word "let them have dominion" is said to every one human being on the earth. The word "go into all the nations and make disciples" is said to everyone who truly believes. So your greatest, the greatest disadvantage that people have is the unbelief, not in God as it were, but in the power that of the gift that God has given you. So what does that mean? If you think what you have is not good enough, well, it's probably not good enough, and it remains not good enough until you change your idea about yourself. Now, your greatest discovery, therefore, is the discovery of that leadership gift. That gift that you are meant to give, not to yourself, but to us. Because there is a gift in everyone, and the gift that you have been given is meant to be transferred, not to be withheld. So now consider this thought, and I think I used it last time, that the fruit is always in the tree. And this thought is so simple, but yet so powerful if you think about it deeply. The fruit is always in the tree, even when it's not the fruiting season. The fruit is always in the tree. Now, it will remain hidden until the tree receives a revelation about its ability to produce the fruit. And of course, that happens during the fruiting season. The tree suddenly realizes that, no, wait a minute, I can produce a fruit. And really, things don't change until you say, wait a minute, I found out something about myself. It's called self-discovery. You discover something about yourself which you are uniquely capable of producing. And everyone on earth has the ability to. Now, obviously, people who still don't have any power of influence are people who, for one reason or the other, have chosen to neglect their gift. Now, the leadership gift is often covered under culture, I mean, when I say culture, I mean sometimes self-doubt. It means lack of belief in you, or where somebody just says, "Shut up there, you can't do that." So the culture that you are in determines whether you survive. Now you can have a maize corn. If you put that inside palm oil, it will never germinate unless you put it in the right environment where it can germinate. Well, the corn is capable of producing its cobs, but you just never see it. Bad education is also another thing, which is why I said that most of us are educated wrongly. We have sometimes um, a wrong education about ourselves. So, which means to really become ourselves, we have to be re-educated about ourselves. Now, I've been talking about God a lot in this, and rightly so, because the reason why we know God is so that we can see a picture of ourselves in God, which means there is no better education about ourselves than an education about God. The more we know about God, the more we can truly see ourselves. And that talks to our leadership. So lack of self-worth and poor self-concept are also some of the things that tend to cover our ability to deliver our gift. Now, I'll say this again very quickly, that the gift that you have has the power to open any door that you currently desire. And I mentioned briefly about Joseph. His experience in Egypt was because there was a gift inside of him. That gift, by the way, when you have a gift, that gift is always with you. It's always with you right from birth and will always remain with you right till exit. But it may never be used. It may never exercise its power. It may remain dormant. It may remain unproductive. So the key assignment that we have is to realize that gift, discover it, and commit to making it produce to the maximum. Now, read what Pharaoh said about Joseph. He said, "For as much as God has revealed this to you, there is none more qualified than you." I'm using plain English. "Only in the throne will I be greater than you. See, I have set you over all Egypt." Now, the question to ask is this: what brought this about? It was simply the fact that Joseph used the power of his gift. Now, sometimes it sounds like we're just talking about what you can do by yourself. No, Joseph made it clear that he recognizes the source of that gift. He said, "Look, what you're asking me to do is not really in me, but I recognize that this has been given to me. There is a God, like Daniel said, there is a God in heaven who reveals secret." So there is the God equation there, which can never ever be underplayed. In fact, that is really the basis of it all. Now, but my challenge is this: that once we're connected to God, there is absolutely nothing that should stop the exercise of the gift that He has given to us. And I would like to say that the gift that you have has national and global transformation power in it, whether it becomes so or not. You cannot transform any environment and society if you are not in leadership position of influence. I don't mean title, I mean in a position where you can influence the authority, the leadership over that land. So position of influence is not the same as possessing a title. I don't mean title at all. Titles are good for their purposes, but much more than that, you need to have the capacity to influence, to change an environment. We can sort of stop here and see if there are questions that anyone might have. Obviously, that's another series that we'll be looking at in due course. So if you have a question, I hope you've sort of highlighted them in the chat room. Otherwise, if you like to ask a question, please let us know, and we'll give you the audience